Good morning, everybody. This is, let me go back to there we go. This is chapter 3, Jubilee. Anybody know what Jubilee is before we get started?
Party.
You got to unmute yourselves, computer people, if you want to
I
talk.
know.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Isn't Jubilee the 50th year, all debts are forgiven and all of that stuff? Was
Yeah, it's actually 49, 7 times 7.
So you have a fresh start.
Yeah, it's like, exactly, it's like a culmination of Sabbaths. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but in the Jewish culture, it was all about forgiveness of debts and redistribution of wealth. I did not know that before this chapter, so it was kind of cool.
It'd be a good thing for.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? I was thinking the same thing. It's like, my gosh, we could solve a lot of world problems if we did that even once every 50 years, you know?
Republicans would never go for it.
Well, you know, a lot of Democrats wouldn't either, so don't put that on the party.
They don't want to give any money to anybody.
Yeah, I don't think that's a party thing. I think that's a rich thing. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna make this minimize so we can see this. Hang on. Maybe I won't. Come on, computer.
Look down at the bottom of the screen and then you can take it way down.
Well, it's usually right here. There. Okay, so the first 2 chapters we were talking about the priests and what the clerical Judean clerical aristocracy, what they were talking about with rules and you know what are you supposed to do in the synagogue and things like that. And so this week we're switching to the Pharisee. So this is the difference between the priest and the Pharisee. The Judean clerical aristocracy did not expect the masses to keep all the purity and the debt regulations. Such piety was for the educated and the affluent. So that's what the priests were trying to control, so to speak. But the Pharisee, they were a renewal movement gaining social power and influence in this time frame. Remember, we're about 70 AD or 70 CE. They gave more emphasis to the agricultural practices and household matters relevant to village life than to temple-centered obligations. I did a spell check and missed a bunch of stuff. Sorry about that. So what's interesting is that Pharisees argued Torah plus oral tradition. And so I said the word synagogue before, but I meant temple. So basically, the priests were all dealing with temple rites. And after the temple was destroyed, then they started shifting towards synagogues. And so that's what the oral tradition is all about. They called it Mishnah. This is the teachings handed down over the centuries, starting from Moses, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that. So it has a parallel authority to the Torah. And then this is when, after the temple was destroyed, this became the dominant faith in Judaism to this day. To this day, they have synagogues and synagogue faith, and they talk about the Mishnah.
Yep, and it became rabbinical Judaism.
Okay, yes, because it was the rabbis instead of the priests, exactly. Okay, so that's where we're at. All right, so anybody want to read for me? Paul's going to read.
Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him.
Keep going.
You fooled me.
I did.
I was taking that because I thought that was going to be the easiest
No.
one.
Sorry.
While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, They asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And on hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners."
Okay. So before we go to the next slide, what did this mean to you before we read what it meant to these authors?
Well, the Pharisees they were nitpickers, I would say, regarding the law. And
Okay.
so seeing Jesus eating with these unpure people,
Mm-hmm.
probably debt, what they called debt in the previous.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus's response was, well, you don't need me. Not what they did, but
Mm-hmm.
these people are the ones that need me.
Okay. Okay.
Make it short.
All right. Anybody else?
I knew before I read the chapter, but they emphasized it in the chapter too, that the local tax collectors were considered partisans to the Romans.
Yes.
And then they would take out their cut as well.
Yes.
Which could be a lot, I guess. So I think that's the reference to sinners when we're talking about the tax collectors.
Okay. Okay.
They were viewed that way by the Pharisees.
So here's my next slide then. Why did they hate the tax collector? Close contact with remember, this is still Gentiles versus Jews. Nobody's quite I don't think they're not a Christian community yet. Let me just put it that way. They're the Jewish Jesus followers and the Gentile Jesus followers, and they're trying to fight with each other.
Something that I always thought about was the Sadducees and Pharisees and all. I don't know the difference. I should. I don't. But they had this kind of vision.
Yeah, tunnel. Mm-hmm.
And even though this one contradicts that one, they didn't recognize that because you don't do things on Sunday and you don't hobnob with the bad people. And, you know,
Yeah.
They lost the big picture.
Right.
Is this repeating everything?
No, that's okay. You're
no,
good.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
So, but that's what, they were not bad people. It's just egotistical maybe, but they
Yeah.
lost the big picture
Yeah.
because they took everything individually.
Right.
So,
Okay. So the reason why people didn't want to associate with tax collectors is they collaborated with the Gentiles. They were unscrupulous bureaucrats. We don't say that about the IRS anymore, do we? No. They were representatives of the oppressive colonial administration, and they were reminders to people of how the Romans were ruling them, political and economically. So it was kind of this, from the Jewish standpoint especially, was kind of this irritant, How could these people learn about Christ, so to speak? So, go ahead, Robin.
One more thing. Their income was, when they raised what the tax was to a little bit higher so they could have an income.
Right.
And they lived in
Luxury.
beautiful places.
There you go.
And it was really because they cheated, because they really stole, because they elevated the taxes just enough.
Oh, you
to
don't
give
think we
them-
do that now?
Oh, yeah.
I was gonna say, wait a minute,
This sounds familiar.
this sounds familiar.
We can relate.
But
I don't think the people in the IRS are making any more money.
No, not the IRS. Now we have to go back to the
Work for
government
the
now.
IRS,
Yeah.
No.
I just
We
had a
were
thought.
held, if we did not file our taxes.
Oh, yeah, she's IRS.
We were, well, I was, we
Yeah.
were subject to being fired, where anybody
Oh,
else
yeah.
who worked for the government was not held to that.
Yeah.
So the representatives and senators were not held to that standard.
Well, my
Only-
guess is you didn't get raises when the taxes raised. Am I correct?
No.
No.
We went, let's see, we did get cost of living, but I think
Yeah.
half of my career there, which was 13 years, we never
Yeah.
got a raise.
Yeah.
Oh, my
And they
gosh.
did not hire new people. It was,
Mhm.
And the workload got bigger.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
it was
really,
horrible.
I was
It's still
tongue in
that way.
cheek about the IRS because I
Yeah.
know some IRS people too. They say that to me too. And it's like,
Yeah,
no,
I
it's
mean,
totally
I hated the
different.
IRS. I like the people I worked with. It was, and they gave me a job. That's the
Yeah.
best I could say for them.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Yeah, being so close to St. Patrick's Day, it kind of reminds me of how my ancestors were treated by the English kings and queens,
Oh,
Yeah.
starting with King Edward in like
Yeah.
1275 or 1280 when he invaded Ireland,
yeah,
and then the kings and queens after him,
yeah.
and the way they treated the Irish, and
Yeah, that is interesting when you
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
think about, how America started too. It was really all about those taxes, I mean,
Yeah.
the English government was trying to tax that tea. If we all know the Boston Tea Party,
yeah.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, taxes are a way for the government to kind of keep control. So back then and now. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what the Jubilee was, but I equated it with debt release.
Mhm.
And our authors went back to show how a shared meal was very important back then, as it is, I would say, in our religion now. So this was why the Pharisees were deeply concerned about these rituals, the dietary rituals, the legal rituals surrounding the table fellowship. But see, what Jesus came and did, he symbolically sat with these people for a reason. He wanted to transcend those boundaries. He wanted to show that it is extraordinary table fellowship to have a community with what we would normally call class enemies. So he's trying to teach that lesson to his people. So that's why he identifies sick with sinner. And then he says, those who think the status quo is healthy because they benefit from it will not respond to Jesus' good news. The socially outcast and the indebted will. So that was an interesting way for me that our authors twisted a little bit, to say what he was saying to these guys. It's kind of like what Robin was saying. Either you think that it's the status quo we need to maintain, because that's what the law says, that's what we're doing. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not what Jubilee means. Jubilee means redistribution, and that means these people need to be part of this too. So this is like the beginning of this controversy that he has with the Pharisees surrounding the meal. And then later on, we'll see in chapter 7 that he basically repudiates the whole basis of the Pharisees' authority at all. So yeah, I say it later, but I really enjoyed this chapter because what they're saying is that these stories began that path of Jesus' healing on the one hand, of his ministry, and then the backstabbing and the people who were plotting his death on the other hand. I mean, we saw it from the beginning of his ministry, which, had to be stressful. All right, who wants to read? Anybody?
I'll take it.
Okay, Carl.
Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins.
Is this the scripture that our favorite song is based on, Nadine? I cannot come to the banquet.
I don't think so. I think that's a parable.
Okay. Oh, that's a
But, I mean,
parable. But this reminded me of it.
Yeah.
Nadine and I learned, I think as kids, and then taught
definitely.
kids. A song about, it was that rich man having a feast, and he invites people and no one will come.
Nobody wants.
This scripture reminded me of that, because it's basically saying Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, this feast, this table isn't for you. And even the fasting rituals, this is something that only the rich can afford to do, and not what the poor can afford to do.
Because they don't experience hunger on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're fasting all the time.
yeah,
Sadly. So when they get food, they
Yeah.
should be able to eat it.
right. Yeah, that's what he's saying. So this slide is just kind of reminding us, we've already talked about it because you guys are smart and you know what this Jubilee is.
Well, we had in the church, there was a whole series about the Jubilee some
I must
years
have missed
ago.
that.
You remember that? I think we have a book up in the
Oh,
library here.
cool.
And they talked, was it reunion material?
I think so.
Maybe it was. Anyway, it was very interesting.
I'm not sure.
I'll have to
Well,
look.
I knew that the Sabbath was the day that, all work stopped, all production, in the fields should stop. And then what I didn't realize is in the 49th year, everything stopped. That's when everybody stops and has this Jubilee, because we're going to be, feasting on our surplus, that we have. But the people in Jesus's time the way I read this is that the people in Jesus's time kind of forgot about the redistribution part, so the Pharisees were saying, hey, this is the law, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And Jesus was saying, wait a minute, like you said, some people just need to eat,
Well, not only that, it gave it back to the people and they didn't want to give it back. I mean, it sounded
Well,
like the
and-
Pharisees were pretty content with
Yeah, Moses set it up. The law was set up to, I like the author's language, Israel's hedge against the inevitable tendency of human societies to concentrate power and wealth. So the law was originally created to put to redistribute that wealth. I keep saying the same word over and over again, but it really is about this cycle of poverty and freeing people from it, and so even today, when a family has to sell off its land in order to service a debt, that starts that cycle of poverty, and then they become landless peasants, and then they have to sell only their labor. And I put in question marks. That's what the working class is about even in our culture. It's
Yes, it
people.
is.
If they can't, they rent, and rent goes up and up and up, and they have to, have 2 jobs and sometimes 3 jobs in order to, pay for their rent and their kids and their food. And so I think that's that cycle of poverty that we're talking about. We see it today. There's a very big distinction between the rich and the poor.
Well,
Some
and
of
it's
us have lived it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
missed that one.
Some of us have lived it.
Yes.
Yeah,
In college days, we
Yeah.
lived it.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like student debt relief.
well, and it's not
That is a
even-
big issue.
the original thing wasn't necessarily to pay off debt. It was maybe you were enslaved.
Yeah.
And so you don't even
Yeah.
have a choice.
You
Everything
sold yourself.
you
Yeah.
you were taken.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that you gave, it was you were taken. So
And so Jubilee was also about freeing slaves, because Moses recognized in the Exodus that we
Giving
needed
back
to,
the land.
remind ourselves of this so that we never do it again.
mhm.
Jim?
Yes, on Channel 19.3, they talked about history and all of that. Well, being close to St. Patrick's Day, not only did this was what I learned, I think I kind of knew about it before, but they were talking about the fact that not only did the English invade Ireland, but now we have English landlords who built
Mhm.
their palaces and nice homes on the
Mhm.
land,
Mm-hmm.
and they made serfs out of the farmers.
Mhm.
It was initially theirs. So the Irish farmers had to give up like maybe 2/3 of the things that they grew
Mhm.
on their own land that was taken over by the English landlords
Yep.
for rent, paying rent on the
Exactly.
land that they initially owned.
Exactly.
Well, and look
And
at,
they only,
Yeah.
and so they only had enough, they had, the nice English landlords gave them enough of that to grow potatoes. And then they had the potato blight
There you
in
go.
1849.
There you go.
And when Queen Victoria found out about it, her reaction was, well, can't they move to Canada or the United States?
Well, and I was gonna say, you can also compare that to the sharecroppers in
Oh,
this
yeah.
country.
Oh, yeah. You think about the systems through the years. I mean, this is, remember what year we're in here, that Jesus is talking about it. Moses talked about it. This is a pattern. Hello. In human development, is that the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and then something has to happen. There has to be, I think, a crisis, and then, I mean, you had the risings, you had, America throw the tea in the ocean or whatever, the bay. And so you had to do something. The working class, the underdogs had to rise up to do it. I mean, the Irish rose up, and
Well, and they weren't welcome when they came to this. No Irish need a fly.
I know we did not welcome them in this country. They came a lot, there were still a lot of them, but
Same thing happened with the coal miners. They had
Yeah,
it so
the
that they
company
lived in
store.
the company store, company buildings. They
Yeah.
had to buy their stuff from the company store
Yeah.
because they paid them with tokens that were only good there.
that's
They
right.
didn't pay them with money that they could go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Grapes of
Yeah.
that.
Musk is planning to build his own city there for people working in his factories.
There you go.
oh, we're not getting that from these people.
Okay. Oh. I'm not sure the speaker's on. Say it again, Jeremy. We don't have our speaker on.
I said Musk is planning to build a city down, I think, in Arizona, wherever he's building his factory for the people who work in his factories to live. It just reminds me of the coal miners.
Ah, Elon Musk is planning on doing that, huh? That's interesting. No, factories. Elon Musk is planning to build factories in
Looking for
Arizona
him.
and then homes for the factory workers. So it could be setting up, I mean, it
New
definitely is
factory.
control.
I
You,
do back,
yeah, the poor,
company store.
I
Well,
thought,
that's what's going on out in DeSoto with that new battery plant that Panasonic's putting in.
oh,
There'll be a community out there for the people that work there.
is it all controlled by the company?
Probably. I mean,
Yeah.
there are already homes that were built there for the munitions plant. That's on
Mhm.
approximately on the site of the old Sunflower munitions plant.
Well, they're not-
So I think they're just kind of replicating what was done before. But I mean, I think a lot of people will probably live there because it'll be convenient.
Yeah,
But they don't have to
Next door
shop
work.
at the company store. They
No,
just
no,
have
I'm not
homes
to
that-
that extent. but
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Right.
that sometimes
not
somebody's-
necessarily paid in tokens
I
like
think the
that.
other thing is too, maybe after a while, the business owners or the people who own the land or whatever figure out that if you put all of the workers in debtor's prison, pretty soon there are no more workers.
Yeah,
So sooner or later, you gotta let them out and, forgive their debts and, put them back to work.
well, and America did fix that problem. You cannot put someone in jail for a debt, and that is actually the
But I
law.
think they did
But
that.
yeah, they did. Yeah,
It never made sense to me, if they owe money, put them in jail so they can't earn
Yeah.
money.
yeah.
Pay their debt. Doesn't make any sense.
Well, when I was doing some studies on the 13th Amendment, everybody thinks the 13th Amendment, oh, no more slavery in America. Well, what they didn't tell us, what the history now tells us, is that they created more laws. It was kind of the beginning of the Jim Crow laws, where if a black man was just loitering, basically just standing on the street, then that was a crime. He was thrown into jail, and then guess who got to come in and use the prisoners for workers?
Yeah,
Those same
the
guys
chain gang.
who were slave owners,
Yeah.
so it's all of a sudden it became an even better economy for the rich because they didn't have to pay the prisoners. They didn't even have to put them in homes, you know. I mean, there's stories of these prisoners just dying in the fields, you know, and they just say, okay, give me another one, you know. So that's America, you know, that's our history too. So it's everywhere, unfortunately.
Don't tell your kids about it, because they don't want to,
Yeah.
they don't want them to feel bad.
Yeah. So Jesus cuts through the piety of fasting to the real issue. A society in which some can afford to fast while others truly go hungry is the society that he is saying that he's attacking. That Jesus likens the sovereignty of God to a party. The new wine of discipleship movement must not be co-opted by the old forms of cosmetic piety. I liked that language. It was the cosmetic piety. I mean, they're saying the same thing. Fasting is still an important part of, you know, religious traditions, but it's the forms that they're doing wrong. It's this old vision of what it looks like, instead of, okay, look around you, look at who's around you, and it doesn't fit anymore.
Well, they were not seeing what the other people were suffering through. Completely, like Robin was saying, had blinders on, and just, they were not making that connection that not everybody can do that.
Yeah, they got together in the temple and they all, well, they just, and even in the synagogues, right? That's where they got together and just debated, you know, and I, of course, you know, I think of Fiddler on the Roof, you know, where that guy, here's this guy who's a milk farmer, and he's, and one of his songs is about, I just want to sit in the synagogue and pray and debate with the rabbi. That's what I want to do in my life. And I thought, you know, that's really what Jesus is talking about here. You know, some people can't afford to sit around and debate.
I always think of Yentl.
Yeah.
Well,
It's so funny how the movies shape us.
The 31st Proverbs of the righteous woman. The men are all sitting at the gate discussing, and she's out taking care of business.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem, you know, for a lot of times people in lower classes. You can't be a milkman, the village milkman, and not work on the Sabbath. Your cows have to be milked.
That's right.
You can't be a shepherd and not take the sheep out
Right.
one day a week. They have to, you know, be fed, and you know that.
Yeah.
You know, they're caught in a trap.
And the rich forget. I think that's what Jesus is trying to point out. Is like don't forget that this is a system that wasn't meant for 100% of the people, you know.
I don't think they forget. I think that they want to feel superior.
Yeah.
That too. Well, yeah, there was the whole thing about, in the Sermon of the Mount, when he's talking about praying publicly and using flowery language and going on and on to be seen. Fasting, you know,
Right.
go in and wash your face so nobody knows, because the hypocrites will make a show of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why that pray in you know, in private.
So much of the time, the way that you get to feel better is if you make somebody else lower.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's.
They didn't like him saying this. Yeah, we all know that. You know, I mean, one of them is then that they started grumbling and going and you know, this is the beginning. Like I said, you know, this is the beginning of them trying to figure out how to get rid of him. You know. Okay, somebody else want to read?
I will.
Okay, Jim.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisee said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?"
Oh, you want to keep going?
There's more.
There's more. Sorry. I should have said it.
Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Eleazar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the concentrated bread, which is unlawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man's Lord, even of the Sabbath.
Now remember, our authors use the Common English Book Bible. We talked about this last week, I think, or a couple weeks ago. Son of Man is translated many different ways in different Bibles. Not many different ways, quite frankly. We saw Son of Man mostly, but it's also translated as human, the human one, which is interesting. So keep that in mind. So the Son of Man. So once again, the Pharisees are trying to control the economic system. When you're supposed to harvest. We already said this. The peasants couldn't afford to allow their fields to lay fallow during that Sabbath year. That was a big problem for them. Sabbath rules clashed with Jubilee ethic. That's what Jesus is trying to teach them. So I went back to 1 Samuel because I didn't remember the story. And so I find it kind of fascinating that our New Testament is just, Jesus was very smart, and of course the authors of the Gospels were very smart because they referred back. This story is in Samuel. This is what David did when he went to Nob and he asked that priest, whatever his name is, Amalek, and it was consecrated bread, and that priest said the same thing to David as what these guys are saying to Jesus. Wait a minute. That's only if the men are holy enough. Have they kept themselves from women? And Davis is like, they're holy enough. They're on a mission. That's good enough, So Jesus is talking about this, and David and his followers were hungry. It was a very practical reason why David said to the priest in this story that his men needed to eat. They were hungry. They had been on this long mission, and hungry people have a right to food despite these crazy restriction laws. Feed the hungry. I mean, I think Jesus was pretty clear about that in all of his comments throughout the whole Bible. I really like how the symbol of bread, and I think our church does a good job with it too. The breaking of bread and how we fellowship. All of these words are used in our own religion too, about what does it mean to break bread together. So I kind of went back, and even in the Old Testament, there were definitely these symbols of what does it mean to break bread and to feed the poor. So in Leviticus, which is the book with all the rules, which everybody is trying to, debate in Jesus's time. But Leviticus tells us, support your kin who have become dependent on you. Leave the surplus gleanings of your harvest to the poor and the stranger. Bread is a symbol of community and sharing that manna. That's what the Jubilee was supposed to be about. That's what the Old Testament is about. And once again, I think, it's kind of this combination of forgetting and like Robin is saying, tunnel vision and arrogance, and everybody's, not following the spirit of Jubilee, even though that's why he's saying, he says it in flowery language of old and new wineskins, which is kind of hard for me to figure out, but he's basically saying you're doing these rituals without thinking about what they mean.
Nowadays, the politicians call it socialization. If they don't want to put people where they're paying people. That's socialism that's coming in. You've got to be careful and not get into socialism.
So is this the beginning of civil disobedience? I thought that was kind of interesting that our authors used these terms, and there were a lot of questions all through, I mean, mostly at the end of the chapter, but I kind of dispersed some of them here. What do we think about with our tables now? I mean, this is not an indictment on this group. This is a question for, are we being inclusive in our neighborhoods, in our country, for those who are hungry in both body and spirit?
No, I don't think we are. I think if anything, some of the politicians are trying to even implement this scripture,
Okay.
I believe. And just kind of ignore the people in need, blaming it on them for being in need.
Well, in political things, I think the term entitlement for those, ways we can, as a society, contribute and support people, they're calling them entitlements, which is completely an opposite,
Yeah.
term. And I think that's there. I'm thinking of our church, and I think our church has done a lot in the last 20 or so years to have that open table. Even hymns now we have in our hymnal talk about that, and in opening ourselves. I think we gained that insight as we became a world church and started seeing other people and their needs and what was going on. So I think then, again, coming back to each individual, I think we need to look at what we do and how, we reach out and
Yeah.
embrace.
Yeah,
We
Yeah.
each do it differently.
Right. Jim?
I see homeless people just about every day, because I live fairly close, KU Med Center, 39th Street, Westport area.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the last time I encountered a homeless person, I said, you know where 39th and Broadway is? Uh-huh. And I said, just a few steps west of Homer's Liquor Store is the Salvation Army. Walk up the steps, push the button, and ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was surprised that he didn't even know where the Salvation Army store was. I said, well, you know where Homer's Liquor Store is. I'm sure he knows where that is. I said, just walk a few steps west and you'll see the Salvation Army store. Just press the button and they'll let you in.
Yeah.
And seek help there.
Our church has an oblation fund. The problem with it is that it doesn't have much money in it. I
Yeah.
don't know how much it does, but I know that they run out of, well,
there's a limit on what they can pull.
There's a limit per congregation, yeah.
He's had a
Per
lot of
person.
activity
Per
with
person,
that,
yeah.
and they said, we don't have any more money for you.
Yeah.
Well, and that's partly because of the limit.
Right.
Because otherwise,
Yeah,
family
there's
would-
no, you have to
Yeah.
spread it to more than one person,
Right.
And the idea isn't to keep doing it over and over, it's to help them
Help
get
them
on
get
their
back
feet
up,
and,
yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
they can give them a start anyway.
right. It's a good system. It's exactly like what you said. I think probably worse now. My dad actually did that for the church. He distributed funds for oblation, and he used to tell me that, it was just heart-wrenching because they couldn't reach everybody. They couldn't help everybody, and with the finances that we're having now in our church, I get that. My guess is that's a lot more problematic. So I just think it's interesting to think about how, this whole Jubilee idea. I mean, obviously this chapter is Jubilee. It's like, my gosh, did they really pull that off for a few years there? And I mean,
To know how many years.
it's like once every 49 years, were they able to, even out the finances and the wealth distribution? Were they able to do that? I mean, the rules are there, but I don't see a lot in history of that happening,
No.
because I mean, like Jesus said, it's always fighting against the greed and what happens to people, kind of, I guess, in normal society of, you make money, you keep it,
Well, we're not really aware of how extensive that went, whether it was just within your community or whether it was, got up to the churches and that level, as far as distributing your wealth. It
Well-
may not be as universal as we're trying to think of it.
Well, remember our own history, Mormon history, that is what Joseph Smith tried to do. I mean, the what are they called? Storehouses? The storehouses. And unfortunately, what happened to Joseph was that the people who were putting the funds into the storehouse got mad that he was distributing too much because people were coming who were very
Beginning.
poor because they heard about it.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, we can eat now.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, the system breaks down when you have the people who are giving, are seeing that too much of it is being given away. I mean, it's just this kind of weird
Well,
balance.
Yeah, I mean, the Jubilee back then was dealing with the Jewish people.
Mhm.
And when Joseph did it, it was like everybody.
All of
who
America,
were- Yeah, a complete, I mean, they hadn't been part of it to begin with.
right?
They just heard about, free money.
Plus the import from the Irish potato famine, wasn't it,
No, that was later,
later?
I think. But it just was bad economic plan. I had a friend who,
It just didn't work,
Dan Edwards, didn't
unfortunately.
he do like a whole thing on that? Remember him? But he did a whole thing on how bad the economy
Well,
was.
church, Christianity apparently has been tussling over this since the beginning, because
Mhm.
we learned in the book about St. Peter and St. Paul that the people following Peter wanted not to work. They just wanted to have,
Yeah.
all things common and
Right,
bring in, the money that way. It's kind of like this perpetual jubilee. And Paul said, no, we work for a living around here.
yeah, yeah.
You have to, and even Paul did himself apparently on his missionary journeys as a tent maker or whatever
Right,
Yeah, him
he knew
and-
how to do.
yeah.
right.
Well, it's just like, you always have people that use the system once they find it, and they figure out how they can continue to use the system, rather than, like you said, where it's supposed to give them a start so that they can build their
Yeah,
lives.
that's
but-
really what I think Jesus wanted, was for people to have a start so that they had the same chance to,
Hmm.
develop and,
Yeah.
and be the person they could be, just like people with wealth did.
Right.
And it's, when you see people living on the street in some cities that have severe homeless problems with tent after tent after tent after tent on the sidewalks, so the way some cities are responding to that is to build these tiny homes, so that people have at least a warm place to be.
Yeah, I've seen
And a
that.
bathroom.
Right.
And, and a kitchen,
Yeah.
just to get
Get 'em out
started
of the
and get by.
elements,
Now,
yeah.
I can't remember where I heard, I don't think it was Kansas City, but one city built homes for homeless veterans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, that's
That's
good.
it.
We have-
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I was hearing
It's
about
all
that
over the
other day.
country, though.
Okay. Which I think, that's reasonable, and,
Is it
probably we should do
veterans
that for
only?
people who are
Is
just
it-
getting
Those
out
are.
of prison.
That one,
They're set
yeah,
for
that
that.
one's just for
Okay.
veterans, and it's basically to get them
Yeah,
a start.
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't think they're supposed to be permanently
That's
there,
really,
but-
that's the spirit of what this is, what Jesus is talking about, so.
Well, and I know
People
last
see
week
it.
we were talking about the Missouri law that Bennetts told us, where it's like, we don't want to see them,
Mm.
that's not helping. Tiny homes are helping.
I know, push them out of the
So,
city.
I mean, what are our own politicians thinking? I mean,
Right.
obviously, they might be talking that they're Christian, but are they?
Yeah,
Are
that's tricky.
they Pharisees?
I don't know.
Sometimes I wonder.
They're on Shawnee Mission Parkway, just as you come off of I-35. There's always people out there, asking for money.
Yeah.
And I think, since they stay there, most of the time, there's one of the motels right there. If you have a room, you get 2 meals a day, plus 1 alcoholic drink. They give you
Oh.
a ticket. My girlfriend her daughter was going through some chemo when she had leukemia, and KU was putting them up in that building and coming and getting them, taking over back and forth. But I think quite a few of those guys get enough money to pay for the room And then that gives them 2 meals a day.
There you go. That's how they exist.
I had a question. You were talking about the bread a little bit ago, and they talked in the chapter about these people back during the Cold War crossed to the Soviet Union as in an effort to
Yeah.
sort of extend.
Sure, their table.
Yeah, had you ever heard of that?
I had never heard
I've
that.
never heard of it either.
And how they went to each town, through the Soviet Union, they were always greeted with bread.
Yeah.
It's like hospitality.
Yeah. I've heard stories similar to that, like in Afghanistan.
Well, and I've heard that when, it was frozen, that people would walk over from Russia into Alaska, but
The only thing I can say is the Cold War really was about the government people and not about the people who were living in
Well, I
those
had
villages.
never heard
So that
about
that made
group
sense. That was,
going
I
over
know,
there
I hadn't
to
either. That was an
come
interesting
make
story.
friends or whatever.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
read about the God smuggler who hid all the Bibles
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
took them in.
We had that book
But I
at
don't
the Herald
remember,
House.
and I've heard a lot of different stories about the Cold War, but I'd never heard that one.
Yeah, that was interesting. All right, let me read this. I'm going to read this last verse because I wanted to. I want to get done. Another time, Jesus went to the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" They remained silent. Okay, come on, computer. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, and he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. I wonder if that's when they went to Herod the first time. Is that what that means to you guys? They went to
Yeah.
Herod, the Herodians.
Yeah,
I assume that's Herod's people.
yeah.
That, now that,
Yeah,
this reminded me of
he was
Godspell.
really evil.
Ah, yeah.
Where one little guy whispers after all the happy songs. And that
Yeah.
was when they went on. I mean, it literally was in there. I asked Paul after reading this, I said, what do you think would have happened if one of the Pharisees guys went, aha,
And actually realized
where
what he
would
was
we
trying
be
to
in
teach.
this world
Yeah.
today if that guy went,
No, I think their
I
pride, I think their
Yeah,
pride
they
says,
couldn't let it
no, we gotta get rid of this guy. He's saying things we don't want him to say.
he's messing our country.
Jesus is echoing, once again, Jesus is echoing what Moses said to everybody in Deuteronomy. I'm not gonna read it. So what I liked this choice of words too, that they were talking about archetypal choices. This is about choosing between heaven and earth, history and destiny, ancestors and descendants, life and death. Are we going to break the law in order to have moral health? That's the question Jesus asked them over and over and over again. And apparently the Pharisees got it wrong over and over again. They decided to plot his death. So instead we've got, this is all of the times that Jesus is choosing life. He's healing the disabled man, and the Galileans are choosing death. This is when they began to plot. So it was these two trajectories that played out until the end of Jesus's life. So here's our final questions. Bread stories. I wrote that question in there because there were a lot of stories in there about bread, and I really liked how our authors were even talking about. Anybody who's been to another country knows that every country has a different way of baking their bread. You could just go across the whole world, and of course, I like bread way too much, but it's one of those things where it's fascinating to me that bread has always been a part of the history of a country. It's how you obviously nourish each other. You sit at the table together, and it's this perfect symbol, of what it means to share community and to share the table. And then my last question, I'm just going to leave it hanging out there because those of you who have read the chapter, I question, have you considered how your tomato got to your table?
Yes.
Huh. I mean, man, they went through it, didn't they? They told us, here's all of the workers and all the poisons and all these things, it's like, oh man.
Yeah.
I've got a vegan niece that's always reminding me how the meat comes to my table. I'm like, stop. I don't want to hear it. That's where I want to be blind a little bit, I have to admit, so it's like, but obviously it's a lesson. It's like saying to us, stop, just think a little bit about your own table. I think that's what the point of this.
We have a pseudo son now, Bill Becker. It's Dorothy's cousin, and he will not eat mammalian flesh.
Mammalian, anything with a mammal.
Anything that's a mammal.
Is it a fish? So you can eat fish?
Cattle, pigs.
Fish are not mammals.
Yeah, pescatarian.
He'll eat chicken and duck.
Pescatarian.
And stuff like
Oh,
that,
he'll eat
but
chicken.
Oh, chicken. Chicken's a mammal.
That's what I say. That's not a mammal.
It's a bird, it's a
It's a
bird.
fowl.
Fowl.
What do you eat, a peacock?
All right.
I have no idea.
I'm gonna have to go retake biology to know who my mammals are.
His
Craig, yeah.
thing is that he doesn't like the feedlots.
Okay,
Well, they're horrible.
there you go.
Yeah.
I mean,
There you go.
so much of
Well,
our,
chicken agriculture isn't any better.
Yeah.
yeah.
I was
so
gonna
much
say
of our-
chicken,
our
yeah.
whole food system in the United States is just top heavy.
Yeah,
and
that's what,
gravy
it's
and
really
all that.
hard for me because it's like, wait, my goodness. I mean, I do think our younger generation is becoming much more aware than we are. I mean, I've got a niece, the same niece, as a matter of fact, she and her husband have decided to live off the land. I mean, they have
did they
bought a little land in Kentucky
That's right.
and they're gonna have chickens to make eggs for them. And it's amazing to me that in 2023, we've got these young adults who are really thinking about this issue a
Well,
lot
because
more.
they're seeing nothing ahead of them.
Mm,
Because we are leaving the next generation or something
Yeah,
we were given, which has been for years the thing that we prided ourselves on is leaving our children better. We're
My
not.
dad grew up on a farm and his older brother got the farm and my aunt raised chickens. And she would sell the chickens, they would, butcher them themselves and so it wasn't like a huge, I remember doing the chickens was not my favorite thing. I remember plucking a few and for a while I was off chicken. But no, I mean, we had one of my cousins, twice removed, was remembering getting the chickens. And I said, oh, I remember my aunt raising them. She goes, that's where we got them, was from Donna. But
yeah.
no, my aunt
Yeah.
did raise chickens. They,
I remember living in Germany as a kid and they raised chickens for their meals. And I can remember our German friend, she put them in boiling water or something so the feathers
Yeah,
would loosen up
yeah.
and then,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you
then
dip
pull
them
these
in the-
wet feathers off.
yeah, no, but it was still a horrible
Yeah,
job.
And it stinks so bad.
Yes, it does.
I was really impressed with the center of bread, getting back to bread and cultural life in Saudi Arabia. I was out in the middle of the desert and there was a small town, Hafar al-Batin, not too far from the base, and we did go to the local grocery store there one day. And the bread aisle, we expect bread to be Wonder Bread and in plastic wraps and nicely stacked on the shelves and so forth. They had like a pallet and the big flatbreads, bigger than a plate, were just stacked up and no covering. People just went in and got 2, 3, however many they wanted for their supper and went and paid for them and put them in their bag. It was just.
Mhm.
There's been
Yeah, I love all of the culture
Yeah,
that
it
is
was just
around
when it was
bread.
stacked up. It was.
Yeah, it's
on
beautiful.
lot of
Facebook
bread.
lately, I've been, they have the reels, and I clicked on a couple of 3 of them that had to do with bread. And so I'm getting all of these things with 2-item breads and, 2-ingredient breads that you can make, and nothing easier than doing this. And, they're making bread out of almond flour and Greek yogurt.
Oh.
And with just a
Oh.
little bit of salt, and that's the ingredients, and
Okay.
it makes,
That's good
flatbread
for
and
the,
stuff.
yeah, for the gluten-free. That's good for gluten-free people.
mhm.
Okay.
I'm getting all sorts of
Yeah.
different ways of making bread really easy.
Yeah, I think the point of this chapter is just to kind of make us aware, You know, let's just increase our awareness of where our food comes from and how we share our food. What is the true meaning of Jubilee in our own lives? That's kind of the
I was gonna say, I
Point.
remember my dad starting tomato plants in February in the house.
yeah. There you go. Okay, thank you, everybody.